Can everyone hear me and see the screen? Okay.
We're good here, Ron.
Okay, great. All right. So today we are going to start with a new book. It's a book of numbers. So last week we went through the book of Leviticus and some part of book of Hebrews. But it's been quite a few months since I had started on Hebrews, so I thought I will start with numbers now, and Hebrews, God willing, we will take at some other point in time. So till now we looked at these books that have been written by Moses. The first 5 books have been written by Moses. So we looked at Genesis, we looked at Exodus, we looked at Leviticus, and now we are coming to the book of Numbers. So why is this book called the book of Numbers? The Hebrew name is not Numbers. The Hebrew name is in the wilderness, because in the Hebrew way, when they write the scroll, they used to write the book in the scroll, and the first few words of the starting few words of the book or the scroll becomes the name of that scroll or the title of that scroll. So Genesis is called as in the beginning, and uh, Numbers is called as in the wilderness, because that is how the book started. The first sentence of this book started in that form, so that becomes the name. That's the Hebrew way of naming the book. But when this book was translated into Greek, they had to give a name to this book, and they gave the book arithmoi. So we know the word arithmetic. Okay, it's numbers. So the Greek name is arithmoi, and that is how we get the English name for this book, which is Numbers. So why is it called Numbers? Because there are two census information in this book. So we know what is census. Census is when the government will count the number of people in their country, and they will make a note of how many people lives in each county, each city, each block, and they have the whole information, who belongs to which religion, which caste, and they have all this demographic information about the people living in that country. That is a census, and it doesn't happen every year, maybe 10 years. In India, it happens every 10 years. So here in this book, God commands Moses to take a census of the people, and it is done 2 times. So there's a lot of numbers in this book about this tribe having so many people. This is he is the leader of this tribe, this group. So a lot of census information is present in this book, and therefore this book has been named as Numbers. Now, the first census can be seen as, somebody can help me. Let's read Numbers chapter 1, verse 1 to 3. Numbers chapter 1, verses 1 to 3.
Now connected to Realme 5 Pro.
And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel, after their families, by the house of their fathers, with the number of their names, every male by their polls, from 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel. Thou and Aaron shall number them by their army.
So this is the first occurrence of the census. So basically, this is a military conscription. They are counting not every person, they are counting males who are 20 years and older who can go to war. So God tells that this is what you shall be counting, males who are 20 years or older and who can go, who is able to go for war in Israel. And where was this census taken? This census was taken when they were at Mount Sinai. And we know that God gave them the law when they were at Mount Sinai. We had seen it in Leviticus and Exodus that they reached Mount Sinai. They came out of Egypt. They reached Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, God came down, gave them the law. And it was at this time when they were around Mount Sinai that God tells them to take the census. Now, read for me Numbers chapter 1, verse 46.
Even all they that were numbered was 600,000 and 3,550.
So, in the first census, the number of men who were counted or who were included in the census were 603,550. Okay, so this is how these were the number of men who were there in the first census. Now the second census can be seen in Numbers chapter 26 verses 1 and 2. Can we read that? Numbers chapter 26 verses 1 and 2.
And it came to pass after the plague that the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest, saying, Take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel from 20 years old and upward throughout their father's house, all that are able to go to war.
Okay, now same chapter, read verse 51.
Numbered of the children of Israel 600,000 and 1,730.
Okay, so Numbers chapter 26 verse 1 and 2 which we read just showed that another census was taken just like the first one, 20 years and older, by their father's house, all male who are able to go to for war for Israel. And the number of people who were included or who were counted were 601,730. In the first census, it was 603,000. In the second census, it is 601,000. So, when we now something about this two census. The two census are separated by 40 years. The first census was taken at Mount Sinai. The second census was taken 40 years later when they reached the border of the promised land, in the land of Moab. So these two census were 40 years apart. Secondly, there is a reduction in the number of men. So overall, we can also consider that the number of people also reduced marginally, or they roughly stayed the same. So roughly 1,800 men were less in the second census. Third thing is, this was an entirely new generation of people. Nobody from the first census was present when the second census was taken. Now, please read for me Numbers chapter 26, verse 63 to 65.
These are they that were numbered by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who numbered the children of Israel in the plains of Moab by Jordan near Jericho. But among these was not a man of them whom Moses and Aaron the priest numbered when they numbered the children of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had set said unto them, They shall surely die in the wilderness, and there was not left a man of them, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun.
So what does these verses tell us? First census was done by Moses and his brother Aaron. The second census was done by Moses and Eleazar, the son of Aaron. The first census had 603,000 men. Second census has 601,000 men. The number of men reduced, or we can say they almost stayed the same. And this verse said there was nobody from the first census, nobody from that generation was present in the second census except Caleb and Joshua. Because God had said that entire generation is going to die in the wilderness. They are not going to enter the promised land, except for Caleb and Joshua. And therefore, when the second census was conducted, according to the word of God, Caleb and Joshua alone were from the previous generation who were alive at that time. So, now let's read one verse, Exodus chapter 1 verses 5 to 7. Exodus chapter 1 verses 5 to 7.
And all the souls that came out of the lions of Jacob was 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all the generation. And the children of Israel multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled.
So we see that when they came to Egypt, there were only 70 people. In a period of 400 years, 70 people became at least 2 million people. Because it says that the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. God blessed them. In 400 years, they became so many people, almost 2 million, at least 2 million. That's a conservative count. It could be more. At least 2 million people became, or God multiplied them. But in the 40 years of wilderness, we see that they did not grow at all. They remained the same number. There was no fruitfulness. There was no increase in the number of people of Israel. We can understand that God was not blessing them. In the wilderness, this two census data shows us that God was not blessing them. So even though it was only 40 years, we don't see any amount of growth, any number of growth in the number of people of Israel. Secondly, why was this happening? Their lack of faith was the reason for the punishment. We all know that when they came to the promised land, they did not have the faith to go and fight and take the land, and they murmured against God. And God said that you will now wander in for 40 years in the desert. And they murmured that their children will die in the desert. So God said, because you said that your children will die, they are the ones who will live and they will enter the promised land. But you yourself will die. So that entire generation was subjected to futility. So we can imagine that it was a very heavy punishment. It's not just that they lived in the wilderness. It's not just that they had to live in the desert or in the wilderness. It's more than that. It's that entire generation had nothing to live for. They had no purpose. That entire generation had no purpose to live. The only thing they had to do they had to get up in the morning. They had to spend the day in whatever way they wanted, and at night go to sleep and just wait for their death. That was the only purpose for them. They had to go in the desert. They were in the desert just to die. So till that entire generation was wiped out, they stayed in the wilderness. So the lack of faith was the reason for such a very heavy punishment. Another thing we can see is the kind of state they are in. They got out of Egypt, but they couldn't get into the promised land. So sometimes we are like that. We get out of sin. We don't enjoy that anymore. We can't go back and sin like before. We are out of that, but we can't obtain the promises of God either. We have got out, but we haven't got in. We are somewhere in between, just like the people of Israel of that generation was. They couldn't obtain the promises of God, and they couldn't go back to Egypt. They were in the wilderness. So sometimes we also get into that kind of state where we can't go back and enjoy sin. We can't do that, but we are never obtaining the promises of God either. We are in kind of some wilderness. Now, that is the reason why we saw the census. The reason, because there were two censuses in this book. It's called the Book of Numbers. But we can also give it another name, and that name is, it could be a book of journeys or wanderings, because this book describes the journeys that Israel took to reach the promised land. They moved, they camped for some time, then they moved again, then they camped for some time, then they moved again, they camped. So they kept on moving till they reached the promised land. And this book describes all the difficulties they endured during these journeys. So many difficulties they endured, they had to face. And this book of Numbers tells us about those incidents. Exodus does not tell us everything about the journey, even though the book name is Exodus, which means going out. But more than half of the book is about tabernacle and how the tabernacle was created. Okay, but in this book we have the instructions God gives them, and also about the journeys and the difficulties they have. So when we look at this book, when we look at the traveling of the Israelites, we need to know what chapters and at what places they were. Okay, roughly. So I've created a table. I don't know if you can see it, but when we start reading the book of Exodus, from chapter 1 to chapter 11, the people of Israel are in one place. They are in Egypt. So they are not traveling. They are in Egypt. They are camping, or they are still. From Exodus chapter 12 to Exodus chapter 18, we can see that they travel from Egypt to Mount Sinai. Okay, so from Exodus chapter 12 to chapter 18, we see them traveling from Egypt to Mount Sinai. So then from Exodus chapter 19 to chapter 40, they are at Mount Sinai. That's where they receive the law, where they receive the instruction. The whole book of Leviticus, chapter 1 to chapter 27, they are at Mount Sinai. From Numbers chapter 1 verse 1 to chapter 10 verse 10, they are at Mount Sinai. So we see Exodus chapter 1 to 11, they are in Egypt. Chapter 12 to 18, they travel to Mount Sinai. And from Exodus chapter 19 to Numbers chapter 10, they are at Mount Sinai. So everything that is happening and being spoken in that period, or whatever we are reading, the whole camp of Israel is at Mount Sinai. That's where all this is happening. Further, from Numbers chapter 10 verse 11 to chapter 12 verse 16, they travel from Sinai to Kadesh. That's a place, name of a place called Kadesh. And it's an 11 days journey. In Kadesh, from Numbers chapter 13 to chapter 20, they are again staying at Kadesh. Okay, so this is the first generation that we are talking about. From Kadesh to Moab, It's from Numbers chapter 20 to chapter 21. Okay. This is a 40-year period that we are covering. From Numbers chapter 20 to chapter 21, verse 35. A 40-year period. But you can see that God has given only 2 chapters for it. It was not significant in the eyes of God. Just 2 chapters and 40 years have been covered of an entire generation. Then from Numbers chapter 22 all the way till the end of Deuteronomy chapter 34, everything is happening at the border of promised land in the land of Moab. So this is how the arrangement of the passages are. They are in one place, then they travel, then they camp, then they travel again, then they camp, then they travel again. And whenever they are camping, whenever they are still, whenever they are at one place, whenever they are not moving, whenever they are still, that's when God speaks to them. That's when God gives them all the instructions that they need. That's when God is speaking unto them. And when they travel, we see that all the instructions that God gave them, we see that during the travel, they break those instructions. They break all the laws. They break all the commandments that God gives them. So we see this thing happening in this arrangement of the narrative, the arrangement of the book. We can see this pattern happening. Now, God spoke to them when they were camping. They broke his instructions when they were traveling. Okay. So now we need to remember that at Mount Sinai, God gave them the law. Let's read Numbers chapter 10, verses 11 to 13. Numbers chapter 10, verses 11 to 13.
Day of the second month, in the second year, that the cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle of testimony, and the children of Israel took their journeys out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran, and they first took their journey according to the commandment of the Lord by hand of Moses.
So here we see there's a very specific term. It says, so they moved on for the first time in accordance with the command of the Lord through Moses. So this is from Mount Sinai. So what about all the travel they did from Egypt to Mount Sinai? They had traveled. So why is it saying that for the first time they moved in accordance with the command of the Lord? So we see that till Mount Sinai, they came as a group, Moses led them. But from Mount Sinai, it is God who is directly leading them. They cannot go unless the cloud moves. And at Mount Sinai, we see certain things happening. Numbers chapter 1 to 4 show us that they became ordered and organized. Family by family, tribe by tribe, they were ordered and they were organized. Where they will camp, who will move first, who will move last, how they shall move, everything was organized in Numbers chapter 1 to 4. They became cleansed and purified. The laws about cleansing and purification was given to them. They became set apart and blessed. Aaron came and blessed them. So at Mount Sinai, they became a people of God, ready and prepared. They were already people of God, but at Mount Sinai, they became prepared people of God. They became ready according to the command of God. And then they were ready to go forward to the promised land. So we see all these things happening at Mount Sinai. Now, one of the things that we need to know is about the time period, how much they spent. So let's read few verses. Now, I told you that it was a 11-day journey from Sinai to Kadesh. That is to the promised land was not very far away from Mount Sinai. Okay. So they started from Egypt. How much time did they spend at Mount Sinai? Okay, so let's read Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 to 2. Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 to 2.
And spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you.
So this is when they are starting from Egypt. We know that the Jews have, Israel has two calendars. One is a civil calendar and one is a spiritual calendar. So God says, now this month shall become the first month for you, and this shall be the starting of the year for you. So in that month, they start from Egypt. They move out of Egypt. And they reach Mount Sinai in roughly 3 months. Okay? And Exodus chapter 40, verse 17. Can we read that? Exodus chapter 40, verse 17.
And it came to pass in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up.
So the tabernacle was erected in the second year, first month. They started their journey in the first year of first month. The tabernacle was set up in the first month of the second year. So during this period, where are they? They are at Mount Sinai. They did not immediately go start for the promised land. So all this whole year, they are camped around Mount Sinai. So when do they start their journey to the promised land? Numbers chapter 10, verse 11 to 13. Can we read just verse 11? Numbers chapter 10, verse 11.
And it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year that the glass taken up from off the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel took their journey out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran. And they first took their journey according to the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses.
So they traveled in the second month of the second year. So if I were to give in our calendar, January 2023, they came out of Egypt. January 2024, the tabernacle was erected. February 2024, they started on their way to Sinai. So you can see they were spending so much months, almost a year or more at Mount Sinai. So, and what happened during the first month of the second year and after the tabernacle was erected and the journey they took to the promised land, in that 1 month gap, the book of Leviticus was given. Those instructions were given. So we see this numbers about the time they took to travel to the promised land. So even though it is an 11 to 12 days of journey to the promised land, they camped around Mount Sinai for almost a year, learning about God and his ways, learning about the law, learning about the ways of God, because they had battles ahead for which they need preparation. They needed to know who they were putting their faith in. They needed to have faith, and God was teaching them how to God was teaching them about himself. Now, at Mount Sinai, God was on the mountain. People were at the base of the mountain. But once the tabernacle was set up, God came and started dwelling in the tabernacle with the people around him. And when he did that, and they all together are going to go into the promised land, the people and the tabernacle and the presence of God is going to go together into the promised land. God wanted them to know how they should walk with him, how they should travel with him. They are taking a journey together with God. And if they had to travel with God, they had to know God's way. So God was teaching them on how to walk with them, walk with him. And in the book of Numbers, we see that every time they walked, they broke his law. And finally, when the second census was taken, nobody from the first generation was present. Everybody had perished. Now we have only 1 minute left, but I will just cover one more point quickly, and then we'll stop. Another name that we can give for this book is the book of murmuring. We see a lot of murmuring, we see a lot of rebellion, a lot of complaints in this book. So we need to remember that almost 2/3 of this book, God did not want it to happen. It's not by God's desire or will. People rebelled. People did not obey the word of God. That 40-year of wilderness is not what God wanted for Israel. But it still happened. And so you can say that most of this book is not exactly what God wanted or had desired for the people of Israel. But the Bible is a very honest book. It tells us exactly what happened and how it happened, and it's for our instruction. So for the book of it, we can also call it the book of murmuring, and we won't read the references, but we'll see at what all points the people murmured. So what all the people murmured about? First of all, they murmured about lack of water and food. They were going through wilderness. They complained about water. They complained about water at Mara. They complained about food, and they missed the food they had in Egypt. We can see that in Exodus and also in Numbers. At Rephidim, they again complained about water. Moses struck a rock and water came forth. Then again at Kadesh, people lacked water. God told Moses to command to the rock. He got so agitated and angry with the people, he hit the rock, and because of which he couldn't enter the promised land. So they complained about water and food. Then we see in Numbers 16 the rebellion of Korah. So people, they were dissatisfied with the leadership. So the people murmured about the leadership. They asked, why are Moses and Aaron lifting themselves up above other people? Then there is a short passage where people were generally dissatisfied with the hardship they were having. They were dissatisfied with life. They were just fed up, and God was angry with them, and they got punished. Then we see Miriam and Aaron rebelling against Moses, and we see Miriam getting affected with leprosy, and then later getting healed. Then we see majorly the biggest one, that they murmured against the promised land, and they whined and complained that they are going to die, and God was really angry with them and punished them by sending them into the wilderness for 40 years. So we see that this is also a book of murmuring. We see that it's a book of Numbers. We see that it's a book of journey, and we also see that it is a book of murmuring. And next time, hopefully, we'll continue further and get into the book. Praise God. God bless.